Hey everybody, good morning, Rob. Guys, I've been wanting to make this video for years. Today we're going to be talking about a guy, architect from a long time ago, Ernest Flagg. When we're done, you're going to say, that guy's pretty cool. Also, we're going to be talking about a specific style, a type of do-it-yourself home building that he popularized from a long time ago that I think is still interesting, that has something to offer even though it's over 100 years old, his designs and his thoughts and so on. Um, let's get started. I first heard about Ernest Flagg back in the 60s and 70s. I was very interested in alternative architecture, still am. But back then I wanted to build my own house. Didn't have a lot of money, was poor. And so I kept reading. Back then we didn't have the internet. We had books, magazines. We had things like the Whole Earth Catalog that would give you information about other stuff. And you'd go and read and you'd find another book and so on. And I would get books like this, Oler's book on $50 up an underground house book. But I kept coming across references to Ernest Flagg and his method of slip form construction of building really cool houses with stone that you find on your property so you could lower your cost and do a lot of the work yourself. And I could never find his book in the library. So one day I asked my library to order it, and they did. They ordered a copy from a library in Washington State to here in Miami, Florida. And then I got it. It was humongous. It was an amazing book. This is like 17 inches by 13. This size book is called Elephantine. They don't make them any bigger. This here is an atlas. Over here is an atlas of the world. This is just a book on houses, and it's bigger than books on the whole world. So Ernest Flagg, before we get into his book, maybe we should back up a little bit. Ernest Flagg was an architect. He left school at 15. He started working for his family. Some of them were doing real estate. He designed a small house. He ended up marrying well. He married a woman that was cousin to, if I'm right, Cornelius Vanderbilt II. Cornelius Vanderbilt I was like the original tycoon. He started with a rowboat and it got a sailboat. He ended up being a shipping tycoon. But anyway, his son was interested in furthering the career of Ernest Flagg, sent him to a college, the most prestigious college on architecture in the world at the time in France. Came back, he started his own uh, firm of designing buildings. He built like many big, huge buildings in New York. He built the world's tallest, or he designed the world's tallest building at the time, the Singer Building. In 1908, it was finished. It was the world's largest building for 3 years until another building came along. To this day, it still holds the record of the largest building ever demolished in peacetime. In 1960 something, they took it down. It's a very interesting building. It's very narrow. Ernest believed in a lot of things, and one thing he believed in is very good-looking buildings, economical and efficient and practical. And one thing about his building is it had a lot of light and ventilation. He believed in having setbacks and height limitations. You wouldn't have a city with like full of sardines in a can. You would have room for air and room for light and so on. His building was narrow because all of his offices in the building would have fresh air and light and so on. The people who remember that building, they said the lobby was palatial. It was like a palace. It was just incredible. It was very, very well designed, very beautiful building. He believed in three things. He believed in practicality, economy, and really good looking buildings. And he became famous. He became rich. He built a 22,000 square feet uh, home for himself and his family. And on his property, even while he was building or designing large, famous, fancy buildings, on his property, he was experimenting building small houses and finding different ways to build them and design them. So you could have small houses that the average person could build and that they would look really good and they wouldn't cost a lot of money and they would last for a long time. And this is what his book is about, Small Houses, their economic design and construction. And he put this book out in 1921, and like I said, he must have thought very well of it because you can't make a book any bigger. um, Small houses are economic design and construction. And if you look in the table of contents, you find things like uh, the modular system. Well, the modular system was one, we'll get to that in a second. You find gardens, mosaic rebel planning tasks. But then he has things like truth and beauty and artistic convention, certainty, symmetry, order, balance, all things that are very subjective that you don't normally find in a book on architecture. He was very opinionated. I have read his book a long, long time ago, and at the time I was reading um, other architects and like Frank Lloyd Wright, and I consider him to have many views that were similar to Wright's. He was very opinionated, very sure of himself. And like I said, some of the things he talks about is very subjective. You may not agree with, but it was very interesting to have someone who spent his lifetime thinking about architecture uh, put his opinions on the page. You could learn a lot from the stuff he wrote. But let's go into his design. That's what we're here for. His design was very interesting. His designs of the small houses, first of all, he built them on a modular system. He would use they would be graphed out to be on like a 45 square uh, module. So everything could be used from one design and reused into another design. Or if you had a builder that was building a lot of these houses, they could have uniform window sizes, door sizes, lumber size. He was years and years ahead of his time in coming up with a standardization of sizes. So it was a lot simpler to build his house if you would build a lot of them. And when he had to design another house by using the modular system, and it was easy for him to just use stuff he had already worked out all the bugs and just place it into the new design. Um, the modular Here he goes into the modular system, but his actual houses, they were consistent in many things. One thing is he always would use the stone and the material that was available in the building site or nearby in the area. That would simplify and reduce the cost quite a bit. Also, the walls of his house were always made of stone. They were thick and they weren't very tall. This allowed him to build without having a lot of high scaffolding. It reduced his labor costs because you could have people make the walls without a lot of skill needed, as opposed to a stonemason who is really an artist. And they're not easy to find and they're very expensive. He would use a form system and have the stones in the form, and the good side of the stone would be facing the form, and in the interior would have rebar and uh, cement or concrete put in between the stones. And when the forms were removed, you would have these stone walls. And these walls were very thick. They were cool in the summer, they were warm in the winter, and they didn't need a lot of them because the walls weren't that high. Also, he got rid of the full um, basement. He got rid of the full attic. Sometimes in the attic uh, you would never have an attic, but you would have timbers to where you could see the framing of the roof. And sometimes you would have like a bedroom up there, with like a loft. Nowadays we call it a loft bedroom, or maybe storage. But basically, you would have exposed timbers in the ceiling, so you would have the attic expense. On the outside, he got rid of the drainage system. He would just have a perimeter of cement around the house, and it was sloping, so the rain would come off the roof and go onto the cement and into the yard or whatever. He didn't have the drainage system on the outside. He tried to get rid of hallways. He would make partitions instead of wallboard and 2x4s. He would use a thin layer of jute, which is like a burlap, and coat it with a plaster. And it was the way he would make partitions in the house. That would reduce the amount of floor space needed for walls, and it was a very quick way to build the walls. My favorite part of his building was the dormers in the ceiling, because you would have an ability to have light coming in from the ceiling. And without exception, everybody who lived in his houses commented on how nice it was to have the light coming down from the skylight dormer, because that's where light normally comes from on planet Earth, from above, and we're just used to it. It's very, and also the houses are kind of full of light, and it's cheerful, and it's not gloomy and dark. And also, by having those dormers that could open and close, you would allow hot air in the summertime to go out. And if they were placed to where you had them on all sides, you would have cross ventilation. You would always have air being sucked out if it was hot. I can remember, now this wasn't a Flag house, but I remember going to the Keys, Pigeon Key, where they had some houses built in the 20s for the people who built the overseas railroad. And it was summertime, and we went inside one, and they had the like clerestory up on top of the roof, where the wind would come from any angle and would suck air out of the hot house. That was the coolest non-air conditioned building I've ever been in my life. Um, I mean, it wasn't like cool from air conditioning, but it was many degrees cooler than outside, just because of the ventilation from the roof. Here is where he's putting the plaster onto the jute, making the walls. Uh, Other things he did is he had a very interesting roof system where he would put layers of the roofing paper, but then he would put copper wires so the roofing paper would go over. And when the wires were going down the roof, it would leave like a design on the roof to make the roofing paper look like tiles. I've never seen anybody else do that. Maybe it didn't work because the piece of copper wire could make a stress on the paper where over time maybe it would fracture, or maybe wind could get underneath. But it was an extremely interesting way to give a design feature to the roof using the least expensive means of covering the roof. He had uh, really, really interesting designs. He had a good way of adding walls connecting to the house on the exterior, making the house look more elegant than would ordinarily look. He All of his houses that I can find that he's built, just about all of them, they're still in use. They're very low maintenance. The and in time he started a company that would give designs to builders, companies, to build these houses across the country. And if they had building codes that were different in their state, so he would adjust the designs accordingly. But because he already had the design up with the modular system and so on, it was easy for him to make small changes. But they're really unusual designs. One of the design features on all of his chimneys, on his fireplaces, he would have a curvature on the cap. So that was one of the only design features that was um, an ornamentation, you might say, but it was still functional. Um, but I just love his dormers on the roof. I've never seen it. Here's the tile I was talking about, where he used the tar paper roll roofing, and he would use little copper wires and enable it to make a pattern on the roof. I've never seen anybody do that, never anywhere. Um, he was very good at adding walls and connecting to the house, and making the structures elegant by the entranceway and so on. He spent a lot of time talking about the placement of the houses on the lots and different ways. Now, these designs are called small houses because they aren't tiny houses. They're small houses, So you have big, large houses like he was living in, 22,000 square feet. Then medium-sized houses for large families, and these would have been considered small. However, when you get to reading and looking closely at the design, you find on like even some of the smaller houses, you have like two bedrooms, and the third bedroom is the servants' quarters. So some of his houses are so small they only have room for one servant. So the 1920s were different. Um, Here's a very small one. I will leave photographs in the video where I can find them, and you can see what they have look like when they're completely done. Um, Ernest was um, a lifelong advocate of trying to build houses or designs for houses that the average person could, with some help, build themselves with raw materials you would likely find on the property. And it was refreshing because nowadays we have people, I'm not knocking it, don't get me wrong. You have people building houses out of steel containers, shipping containers. I applaud their improvisational skills, their ingenuity, but when they're done, they're still living in shipping containers. Where Ernest Flagg, he didn't study on how to be poor. He studied on how you could live rich without spending a lot of money and ending up with something that would last for generations. Um, these are fascinating designs. I don't think with all the stuff that he has done is may still be applicable. This is from 100 years ago. There has been changes in building construction methods and tools and systems that are available now that weren't available then. Also, you have things that are more strict with building. One of the negative aspects is that if you do build a house in this method, if something was to go wrong and you want a contractor to help repair the house, there's very few people skilled in building slip form house construction. But it isn't a completely alien concept. It shouldn't be that difficult to retrofit some of his designs and get a engineers or architects to sign off on the construction. So they have a long history of being built and used without any problems. Um, Many other architects have come up with designs for poor people or average people, and over time their designs have come up with problems where there's been very few problems with the designs that Ernest came up with. There's really strong, well-built houses, beautiful, handsome-looking buildings, and I think they should be looked into some more. Um, Ernest spent a lot of time trying to bring awareness to preserving old buildings, old architectural styles that were worth preserving, and also trying to have codes where the buildings that were built in a community um, were on a human scale. The people weren't just packed in like rats in a cage or sardines in a can. He was always interested in being a responsible architect, and he did a lot and should be more well known than he has been, I think. And like I said, the person I purchased this book from was from New York, and he was familiar with the Singer Building, and he was always sad that the Singer Building was demolished. He said it was the most wonderful interior of any office building he'd ever been in his entire life. Um, the outside of the Singer Building was kind of unusual, but it's still very, very unique and wonderful building. But the inside was even more interesting. So I think the slip form construction, and I'm such a big fan of the dormers and the ventilation and skylight on the ceiling where you can have the wind come in from all four directions. Although his was just two directions. Um, but very interesting person, very interesting designs, and very interesting book. You can get this book on paperback, and much smaller, about the same size as this, for like 15. I'll leave a link to it on Amazon. But the actual this size, they go for hundreds of dollars now. So and you get to learn about truth and beauty, and very very opinionated person about different things that uh, not just architecture. So guys, hope you find this book interesting and this person interesting, and you take a look at the designs of Ernest Flagg. And if I can find, there is a book that I got back in the 70s. There was a man using Ernest's method to build his own design. It was not as grand looking as these. Very simple house, no dormers and so on. But he purchased a piece of property out west somewhere, and he, his wife, and his two small children were his workforce, and they built a slip form stone house for like $1,200 back in the late 60s, early 70s. So that was his work crew. Two little grade school kids and his wife. And she looked like she was 120 pounds. So, yeah, it's a very interesting method of construction. And I think you might be interested in learning more about Ernest Flagg. And I know I'm leaving something out, but let's go to the last page. He died in 1957. He was born in 47, lived 90 years. And like 10 years later, they tore down his Singer building. But during the 60s and early 70s, the whole country was going through urban renewal, and they were tearing down fantastic buildings all across the country, which was criminal. It's often said that the Second World War, the bombs destroyed all the architecture in Europe and all, but fantastic. And in U.S., we did it on our own. We did it without the bombs. uh, we've lost a lot of fantastic buildings and architecture over the years. So yeah, you can live in a metal shipping container, or you can live in a house that you can build yourself. Hope this was something cool. I'll try to find that book about the guy who built his house with his wife and two little kids. And take care. See you out there.